I asked Rachel to take that last sentence out of my bio if no one else talked about their hobbies, because gosh, wouldn't that be embarrassing? But anyway, I'm here from the Community Water Center, and I'm going to be talking about Community Water Center's background and some of the sampling work we're doing with Wes and Claire. And shout out to our collaborators. We are working with the West Collaborative, of course, EPA, Silent Spring Institute, and NIH. And so today I'll start with some background on Community Water Center, or CWC is how I'll be referring to it from now on, because it's a mouthful, and our community-driven approach, how we use that to do domestic well sampling and follow up with the participants of that sampling, and then specifically the West Sampling Project and the drinking water tool we developed and how that informed our site selection, and then close with some final considerations. So Community Water Center's mission is to act as a catalyst for community water solutions through organizing, education, and advocacy in California. And our vision is to ensure that all Californians have access to safe, clean, and affordable water, which is unfortunately not the case currently. We've got offices in Visalia, Watsonville, where I am, and Sacramento. And we've been building this movement for water justice in the Central Coast and Central Valley for the last 16 or so-ish years under the leadership of our co-founder and executive director, Susana de Anda. And we work alongside directly impacted residents to advocate for more just water policies. That is the foundation of everything. So our community-driven approach, we focus our work in rural and low-income communities, and that, of course, comes with lots of challenges. There are communication barriers, language. Most of these, or a lot of the population in these rural communities, speak Spanish, and some households only speak Spanish and don't have any English speakers, as well as jargon, making sure information that we're providing is accessible in every sort of language. Limited access to information. Maybe there's not computers. Again, the accessibility includes language, and then a history of distrust. These communities, there's countless examples of entities coming in and saying we're going to do all this work and providing some hope, and then things getting cut short, funding getting pulled, priorities changing for that entity. And sometimes this has happened multiple times in the same community, and often those efforts, even if the intentions are good, are very prescriptive. We've decided this is what you need, and this is how we're going to fix it. It's not incorporating or making space for community feedback or allowing the community to have ownership of the proposed improvements or changes. And so we, to combat that kind of general approach in the past, we prioritize these historically underserved populations, and community first and empowerment of those communities is the priority, full stop. That is the main goal. We want to set them up so that when we step away, they feel like they have the power and the information to advocate for themselves for the rest of forever. While like not abandoning them and still providing help if they ask for it. And so we do that through providing information and follow through with action steps, and all of that groundwork provides a strong foundation for technical assistance projects that we often end up doing in these communities. And so talking about our work with domestic well sampling, I'll start with a mildly horrifying statistic from the State Water Board's 2023 Drinking Water Needs Assessment that around 53% of domestic wells are at high risk of water quality issues and or water quantity shortage. and this is just a best estimate due to limited data, so it could be a larger number than that. It might be smaller. But so we're not where we need to be, essentially. And like Claire mentioned, there's no mandatory sampling for domestic wells. The onus of management of quality and quantity is fully on the owner of the well, who often in these rural communities are not equipped with the know-how or the funds to handle that management. Most people anywhere aren't. And the need for baseline water quality information to determine the main contaminants and formulate interim long-term solutions is essential, right? But there's all these wells are on people's private property, so there's barriers to that. Which is where our community approach comes in, trying to break down some of those barriers and build that trust to get that baseline water quality information for the community and for research purposes. I'll also note that part of our work with these communities and empowering them to advocate for themselves is we just recently got a bill. It got through the Assembly and is now in the Senate. But for tenants to be able to consent to having their water quality tested without the consent of the owner of the property or the landlord, which is huge. That's a barrier that we run into all the time. If tenants are undocumented, they're not trying to ruffle any feathers or even like just remind anyone that they're there. Which is totally understandable. Also, we've all had terrible landlords and you just don't want to mess with them if you don't have to. And lots of times the landlords live in another state, they're just unresponsive. So that is like an issue we run into all the time. And often we just end up testing anyway because people should have the right to know what's in their water. But it's been a gray area and now we're getting real clarity by saying we need this. And an essential part of any water quality sampling we do is the follow-up. Lots of times these people have had their water quality sampled in the past by one of those defunct projects, or maybe it's a small community water system or local small water system, and they've had the county test their water and they get the results in the mail and they're like, okay, cool. Without anyone really telling them implications of that information or telling them what they can do about it. And that can be overwhelming. What do you do with that information? So we provide the results in an accessible format. That's the preferred language without any jargon. And we often, as often as possible, deliver those results in person. We go through the results with them step by step with staff that speaks the preferred language and can address any questions there and then, and providing recommendations. These are the things you can do. Sorry, this fabric is not name tag friendly. Like, these are the things you can do right now. These are the steps you can take. These are like what we're gonna do next. This, like, we're doing this together. You're not by yourself, and we're gonna find a solution, an immediate, probably short-term solution, while we work on something bigger and better. And a lot of times those interim solutions come in the form of, we have bottled water programs and dry well programs in the regions. It's also important to note with the tenant bill thing that a lot of these programs have the prerequisite of getting permission of the property owner or the landowner, and that would also eliminate that barrier for these programs. And then we also recommend like state certified filters and try to do whatever we can to get them drinkable water immediately. And then we start working on long-term solutions, and we often start that by building community momentum with community meetings and advocacy opportunities. So, I mean, I'm sure you all have neighbors. How many of those neighbors do you really have conversations with, and how many of them have you talked to about your water quality? Probably not many. And that's the same everywhere. You know, people are busy, they wave to each other when they leave. And in these rural communities, you know, houses are far apart. You're not really in close quarters. So often these community meetings are the first time that they realize that this is a community-wide issue, and they can commiserate and talk about their frustrations and talk about like what has been done in the past. Oh, like somebody came and said they were going to do this for me and that didn't happen, and somebody else is like, oh yeah, that happened to me too. So this is a space that we create and hold for them to get oriented in their community wide issue and start to get that sense of, okay, this isn't just a me problem. I feel a little better. I've talked to some people who I can relate to. And then also creating opportunities like going to Sacramento and lobbying for the tenant water quality bill, where they can have an input, give them a voice, give them opportunities, try to mitigate or eliminate as many of the barriers to those opportunities as we can, and start building that momentum and building that sense of empowerment and listening to their feedback. Like, I'm still unsure about this because of this. This is what would make me feel more confident. And responding to that, every community is different and nuanced, and it's hard and it's exciting, but so worth it. And then, of course, we get into technical assistance projects to develop infrastructure projects where feasible for these long-term solutions. Oftentimes there's not, the contamination is so severe that certified filters won't even treat it to safe levels. So we need to think of a more permanent and sustainable solution. And that can come in the form of consolidation, new water system formation, treatment, new wells, or any combination of those things. We try to find the best option for the community based on the community's priorities and what they want for their community. And so that's how we got involved with the West Sampling Project. I believe our general approach to our work makes us uniquely qualified for collaborating on this. And so we're mainly involved with aim 2 and 3 of the project, which are conducting community-based research to characterize the presence of regulated and novel unregulated chemicals in tap water, and test the hypothesis that contaminant concentrations vary by proximity to sources of drinking water threats. Aim 3 is to facilitate public health action through individualized and aggregate report back of results to participants in the study. And the way we're going about that is conducting a questionnaire with our participants on their experience with their drinking water, tap water sampling at domestic wells and small rural public water systems, and then the report back piece that Silent Spring generated for us. And so there are kind of 3 pieces to the sampling project. We're doing targeted sampling for common groundwater contaminants. We're including this kind of usual suspects sampling because it requires a lot of time and effort to coordinate these sampling opportunities. A lot of these people have to be home to do this hour-long questionnaire, and people need to be home from work. So there's a lot of logistics. So we want to make the most of those opportunities. While we have access, we're going to get the most information possible. And then we're also doing targeted PFAS sampling for 70 compounds which is a much wider range than a lot of programs are sampling for that we're aware of. And so we're casting a much wider net in general for analytes than most other regulatory and research sampling that's happening, especially in these domestic well communities. And we're also doing non-targeted analysis in the form of a carbon block filter to identify the presence of unanticipated contaminants and have the potential to provide data on emerging contaminant risk. The limitation, of course, is that it's not quantitative, and that process involves running about 100 gallons of water through the filter at a rate of about half a gallon per minute. I have the sunburn to prove that takes a while. And so we started this whole process with the drinking water tool developed by CWC and WES because we wanted to sample in areas of high risk, and so we need to figure out where those areas are, right? So, and Claire would be the one to ask questions about this for the future, because I wasn't super involved in this process, so I'm doing my best here. But they created a new layer to the drinking water tool describing drinking water threats in California, including water samples for PFAS. And in order to generate the layer, they pulled data from GeoTracker, which currently includes waterborne sampling efforts and UCMR data. They selected all of the GeoTracker data that represented water samples, calculated PFAS concentrations, and flag samples where PFAS were detected, and samples that exceeded the proposed MCLs. And then from there, we identified areas of unprecedented contamination. Again, the limitation here is that we aren't looking at concentration levels, just presence absence. And from there, we also used GeoTracker data on known and suspected PFAS sources to map areas at risk of PFAS contamination from the sources included up here. Also, in addition to the GeoTracker data, they integrated supplementary data from other state and government sources, and the data sets are available for download actually from the drinking water tool. And so we use the data from the drinking water tool to select our sampling sites for our current study in the Central Valley and the Central Coast. And so when selecting our sample sites, especially for this first round, we're doing 10 sites in each, 10 in the Central Coast and 10 in the Central Valley. We separated them into kind of 3 tiers. The first being where CWC already has a presence. Those are obviously going to be areas where there's the lowest barrier to entry and permission for sampling. Tier 2 was the proximity to those drinking water threats that were determined in the drinking water tool. And then tier 3 is other sampling efforts going on. So if there's any overlap where State Water Board has sampling efforts going on, or any other drinking water sampling studies. So I'll close with some final considerations. Very little is known about PFAS occurrence in general, particularly in domestic wells. There's very little data on domestic wells in general, so especially when it comes to PFAS, there's a big blank spot there that we're hoping to fill in a little bit. And to implement solutions, we need to identify what the problem is and where it is, and these communities that are often just completely overlooked. We need to figure out what's going on so we can help them and not allow them to be overlooked any longer. And better data will inform better policy. We have proof that it works. We're getting bills passed. We're having our community members are motivated to advocate for themselves and ask for what they need. And we can help by providing the data to back that up, give them some hard evidence behind them that they can show with their personal experience. And that's all I have for you. Feel free to contact me if you want to talk about books or collecting vinyl, or any water related things. That's all I got for you.